What if the most familiar prayer in human history were not merely a string of holy words, but a living key, capable of awakening hidden forces within the soul? What if the Lord's Prayer were, as Rudolf Steiner once suggested, a spiritual architecture that mirrors the very design of the universe itself? We have repeated it for centuries, whispered it before sleep, murmured it in despair, sung it in cathedrals, but few have seen its inner fire. The secret is that this prayer is not about asking for help. It is about remembering who we are. Steiner spoke of the Lord's Prayer as the most perfect revelation of the human constitution. Every phrase, he said, touches one layer of our being, from the depths of the physical to the radiant summit of spirit. When one truly understands its rhythm, one no longer recites it. One participates in creation itself. In this sense, prayer is not speech. It is participation in the living word. Imagine for a moment that each line is like a rung on Jacob's ladder, connecting the earthly consciousness to the higher worlds. The words, "Our Father, who art in heaven," are not a cry toward a distant deity, but the first recognition of the divine origin of the human I. Each subsequent line descends into denser layers of existence: name, kingdom, will, bread, forgiveness, and protection, until the whole human being is embraced and harmonized by divine rhythm. When recited consciously, the prayer becomes a spiral, turning both inward and upward, awakening what Steiner called the sleeping temple within. This hidden architecture was not invented by human thought. It was revealed to humanity through the Christ impulse, the force that unites spirit and matter. Steiner described Christ as the being who entered human evolution to bring balance between Luciferic exaltation and Ahrimanic materialism. In the Lord's Prayer, this balance is encoded. It begins in the heavens but ends upon the earth. It moves from pure spirit into the very clay of daily life. It is the rhythm of descent and ascent, of incarnation and redemption. But how do we approach this today, in a world that has forgotten how to listen to the sacred language of rhythm and vibration? We live surrounded by noise, mechanical, informational, emotional, and yet the Lord's Prayer speaks through silence. Its true meaning can only be heard by an inward ear. When one utters the words slowly, letting each phrase breathe, one begins to sense a pulse, a breathing between the soul and the cosmos. Steiner said that prayer is not about sending words to heaven. It is about aligning one's inner currents with the cosmic breath. To truly experience this, one might try a simple act. Before speaking the prayer, close the eyes and sense the stillness behind the heartbeat. Then imagine that every breath carries a movement from earth to heaven and back again. When the words arise, "Our Father, who art in heaven," they should come not from the lips, but from the center of the heart, as if spoken by the soul itself. In that moment, prayer becomes a creative act, an invisible architecture of light forming within and around you. Consider how different life would feel if every morning began not with anxious thoughts, but with this act of remembrance. The words would not be a shield against the world, but a foundation under your feet. They would remind you that even as the day pulls you into its turbulence, you are held in a rhythm older than the stars, a rhythm that shaped the world before the first dawn. The secret Steiner revealed is that in the Lord's Prayer, humanity is given a map of evolution itself, a path from divine origin to earthly embodiment and back again. The prayer's 7 petitions correspond not to abstract theology, but to the living stages of spiritual awakening. To walk through it consciously is to pass through the very anatomy of the soul. Thus begins our exploration, not of words, but of living powers. We will follow this sacred current line by line, entering each as one might step into a temple chamber, uncovering what Steiner called the living breath of the cosmos that pulses beneath its syllables. By the end, you may find that what once seemed a humble prayer becomes an instrument of transformation, a way to harmonize your thoughts, your breath, your will with the divine architecture of being itself. Our Father, who art in heaven. Simple, tender, and yet behind these words lies a truth so immense that it can overturn the entire landscape of human self-understanding. For Rudolf Steiner, this opening line is not a call sent upward into the sky, it is a call inward, toward remembrance. It is the human spirit remembering its source. The one who utters it awakens from the dream of separateness, as a child remembering the warmth of a forgotten home. Steiner often spoke of how modern humanity suffers from amnesia of origin. We have become clever, yes, brilliant with machines, swift with ideas, but hollowed by forgetfulness. We have forgotten that the divine lives not only beyond the clouds, but also in the architecture of our bones, the rhythm of our breath, the fire of our will. When the soul says, "Our Father," it does not point outward, it reclaims its cosmic ancestry. It whispers, "I am of divine lineage." The Father is not an authority outside me, but the source of my very being, shining through the center of my eye. Picture, if you will, a single spark lifted from a great sun. Though it drifts far and cools in the distance, the memory of that light remains within it. That is the human condition. We wander through the twilight of the material world, chasing reflections of the true light, wealth, recognition, pleasure, while the radiant source of our identity burns quietly within us. The first words of the Lord's Prayer are the act of turning back, of recognizing the sun from which we came. In Steiner's teaching, this remembrance is not sentimental, it is initiatory. It is the beginning of spiritual awakening, the moment when the soul stands upright and says, "I am more than this flesh, more than these fleeting emotions. I belong to something vast and eternal." To say "Our Father" with awareness is to awaken the divine memory within the heart, which Steiner called the seed of the higher self, the true I. Notice too the first word, "our." It is not my Father. The prayer immediately dissolves the illusion of isolation. Each time you say "our," you are joining an invisible chorus of souls, past, present, and future, who are part of the same great organism of spirit. Steiner described this as the realization that the individual I and the cosmic I are one in essence, as the drop and the ocean share the same water. In that word, "our," the soul learns humility and unity simultaneously, and then comes the phrase, "who art in heaven." Heaven, Steiner explained, is not a geographical location, but a state of consciousness, the realm of harmony and divine law from which our being descends. To say, "who art in heaven," is to orient the inner compass toward the spiritual world, to acknowledge that above the turbulence of life there exists a perfect order, a sphere of archetypes and pure meaning. When we remember this, our chaotic earthly life begins to realign itself, as iron filings realign when a magnet is placed near them. Ask yourself, how often do we live as if heaven were unreachable, as if divinity were forever outside the horizon of our senses? And yet, when we pause, perhaps in the stillness before dawn, or when the heart softens unexpectedly, we feel it. That quiet radiance that does not come from the world, but through it. Steiner would say that such moments are glimpses of the etheric light of the heavens, shining through the veil of the material. The prayer teaches us to notice and to dwell there, if only for a breath. Spiritually, this first line acts as grounding. It anchors us not downward into matter, but upward into spirit. Many people speak of energy protection, fearing invisible forces or emotional storms. Steiner's path reminds us that the most powerful protection is remembrance of origin. When the soul knows its source, it cannot be possessed by foreign influences, because it is already possessed by the divine. No shadow can cling to a being who remembers the sun. Try this as a living practice. Each morning, before the day unfolds its demands, speak quietly the words, "Our Father, who art in heaven." As you do, feel your spine lengthen as if your whole being were a column between earth and sky. Sense the heavens not above your head, but shining through the crown, entering your heart, your hands, your breath. Feel the subtle current of warmth that awakens when you remember. I am of that light. I am never separate. In time, the words cease to be speech and become vibration. They begin to hum within the etheric body like a tuning fork aligning itself with a grander harmony. The prayer becomes less an address and more an echo of what is eternally true. And in that echo, something in you begins to shift. The burdens of loneliness, anxiety, and fear loosen their grip, because you are no longer speaking from the small personality, you are speaking from the immortal center that has never been apart from heaven. Thus, the first line of the Lord's Prayer is not a petition, but a proclamation. It affirms divine memory, cosmic belonging, and the awakening of the higher self. Steiner revealed it as the first threshold of initiation, the turning point where the human being begins the long journey home. For once we have remembered the source, all the rest of the prayer becomes the descent of that light into every corner of our existence. Hallowed be thy name. Here the prayer turns from remembrance to consecration. After awakening to the divine origin through our Father, the soul must now recognize the power that streams through the name. For Rudolf Steiner, this was no mere reverence for sacred language. The name is not a label. It is a vibration, a living being. To hallow the name is to awaken the creative word within oneself, to realize that every sound, every thought, every syllable carries a formative force shaping both inner and outer worlds. Steiner taught that in the beginning of human evolution, the word, the logos, was not something humans used, but something that used them. Speech arose from the breathing of the cosmos itself. To speak was to resonate with the world's creative rhythm. Over time, as humanity descended deeper into material consciousness, the word became hollowed out, mere noise, detached from spirit. Yet the divine potential of speech still slumbers in the human soul. When we say, "Hallowed be thy name," we acknowledge the sacred essence of sound and vow to restore its purity. Consider how our words often scatter energy. Complaints, gossip, careless sarcasm. Each thought spoken in bitterness creates subtle forms in the etheric world, distorted echoes that eventually shape our mood, our health, even our destiny. Steiner compared thought and speech to streams of formative etheric forces. When they flow in harmony, they nourish life. When they flow chaotically, they wither it. To hallow the name, then, is to reorient our speech toward creative truth, to speak as the gods once spoke, out of being, not opinion. Imagine a craftsman shaping glass with breath. Every exhalation determines the form. If the breath trembles, the shape distorts. So it is with our words. Each carries the imprint of our inner state. When the heart is pure and the mind still, words become vessels of light. They heal, strengthen, and call forth order from confusion. When the heart is restless or ego-bound, speech becomes smoke obscuring the inner fire. This is why Steiner urged students of spiritual science to cultivate reverent speech, not solemn, but conscious. To speak with awareness is to breathe spirit into matter. In this sense, hallowed be thy name is not only about the divine name, it is an instruction to keep every name holy, to remember that naming itself is an act of creation. Every time we name a thing, we give it a place in our inner cosmos. Do we name it with love or with judgment? Do we call it forth into light or bury it under contempt? Ask yourself, how do I speak of others when they are not present? How do I name myself in thought? Each self-accusation, each word of complaint is a small desecration of the temple of language. Yet even a whisper of gratitude, spoken sincerely, repairs the etheric fabric around us. If we understood the spiritual physics of speech, we would choose our words as carefully as one chooses what to place in a chalice. Steiner often reminded his students that the true path of initiation begins with purification of thought and word. For just as the Logos created the cosmos through sound, the human being recreates his own inner world through the continual echo of his thinking and speaking. Hallowed be thy name thus becomes a meditation, to attune one's inner speech to the divine rhythm, to ensure that each word resonates with truth, beauty, and goodness. There is also a deeper mystery here. The name of God, in the ancient sense, is not something that can be pronounced. It is the entire creative vibration of existence, the sound that hums in stars, in blood, in breath. When we say, "Hallowed be thy name," we are not exalting an external deity's title. We are aligning ourselves with the sacred frequency that sustains the world. To hallow the name is to vibrate with the music of creation. A simple exercise. Before speaking, pause for a heartbeat. Feel the breath gather within you, as though it came from the center of the cosmos. Let that breath become conscious, filled with warmth and clarity. Then speak, letting each word carry the quality of your intent. Do this often, and you will notice a transformation, not only in how others respond to you, but in how the world itself begins to echo your inner tone. For those seeking spiritual protection, this line carries a special power. When the human being aligns speech with truth, he stands within the resonance of divine harmony, and discordant forces cannot enter. To hallow the name is to surround oneself with the living vibration of the Logos, the very field that repels falsehood and fear. Steiner once said that purity of speech is a shield of light. Through it, the soul becomes transparent to spirit, and nothing untrue can cling. Imagine now the world as a vast sea of vibration, each human voice a ripple upon it. Most ripples are random, colliding, canceling each other out. But when a voice begins to speak with consciousness, reverence, and love, the waves organize around it, harmony radiates outward. In time, that harmony becomes contagious. It transforms homes, communities, and even landscapes. Such is the unseen power hidden within the second petition of the Lord's Prayer. Hallowed be thy name is not only reverence, it is responsibility. It asks us to remember that the word we utter is not separate from the word that formed the stars. When we speak, the universe listens and answers in kind. Thus, to hallow the name is to hallow life itself. Thy kingdom come. After awakening the sacred word, the soul must now make space for its descent. Steiner saw this phrase not as a plea for divine intervention, but as the promise of spiritual architecture, the building of the inner kingdom through conscious participation. The kingdom of God is not a place one travels to after death. It is a realm one constructs within oneself while still alive. When we say, "Thy kingdom come," we invite the order of the heavens to take root in the soil of the human heart. In Steiner's cosmology, human evolution is the gradual manifestation of the divine kingdom within earthly substance. The spirit does not reject matter. It seeks to inhabit it, to spiritualize it from within. The prayer's third petition is therefore a call to co-creation, that the celestial harmony of the higher worlds might begin to pulse within the chaotic field of daily life. When the soul utters these words with awareness, it becomes a builder, shaping invisible bricks of thought, feeling, and deed into a temple of divine presence. Imagine a gardener tending a barren patch of ground. At first, it is only dust and thorns, and the work seems hopeless. But with each act of care, the loosening of soil, the planting of seeds, the silent wading through darkness, life begins to awaken. That is the work of the soul when it prays, "Thy kingdom come." We are cultivating inner ground, softening it through patience and service so that the divine life can germinate. Each thought of love, each moment of truthfulness is a seed of the kingdom. Steiner spoke often of the moral ether, the subtle field created by human virtue. Every act of compassion strengthens this etheric atmosphere. Every selfish deed darkens it. The kingdom of God, he said, will not descend as thunder from the sky. It must be woven, breath by breath, through human striving. It is the collective aura of awakened hearts, a living organism of light. And yet, It begins with one individual deciding to live as though heaven were already here. Reflect for a moment. How often do we search for spiritual revelation while ignoring the quiet sanctity of ordinary life? We imagine the kingdom as something far away, a golden realm to be entered after heroic deeds or mystical experiences. But perhaps it is as close as the way we pour a cup of tea, the way we speak to a child, the way we meet the gaze of a stranger. When the soul is awake, even the simplest gesture can become a doorway for divine order to enter the world. This is why Steiner emphasized inner discipline, not as repression, but as spiritual architecture. To build the kingdom within, we must create forms that can receive it. Just as a violin must be tuned before it can produce harmony, the human soul must be attuned through thought control, emotional balance, and purified will. Meditation, concentration, and moral reflection are not escapes from life. They are the carpentry of the inner temple. The phrase, "Thy kingdom come," thus becomes a practice of alignment. It reminds us that every chaos we encounter, whether in society or in our own thoughts, is an unfinished corner of the temple awaiting our conscious touch. Steiner said that the modern human being's task is not to flee the material world, but to transform it. The kingdom comes wherever spirit is recognized in matter, wherever love orders the seeming randomness of existence. Perhaps you have felt moments when the veil of confusion suddenly lifted, when nature, art, or silence seemed to glow from within. That radiance is a glimpse of the kingdom. It is not an external miracle, but an internal unveiling, heaven momentarily manifesting through your own clarity. The prayer teaches us to sustain that state, to let it deepen until it becomes the normal atmosphere of our life. A question arises: can the kingdom truly come into a world so divided, so restless, so intoxicated by noise? Steiner would answer, it must, for the kingdom is not the denial of imperfection, but its transmutation. Like gold hidden in ore, it waits for the heat of consciousness to reveal its brilliance. Every conflict is a concealed opportunity for harmony, every darkness a waiting form for light. When enough souls begin to live from this awareness, the invisible kingdom will begin to crystallize into the visible. As a personal practice, try this. When you feel disordered or lost, breathe deeply and silently say, "Thy kingdom come." Do not imagine a distant heaven descending. Instead, feel a subtle organizing force awakening within you. The will to bring clarity where there is confusion, love where there is fear, purpose where there is drift. Let that force radiate outward, touching your environment, harmonizing the unseen fields around you. The world responds, often quietly but unmistakably, to such inner order. Steiner hinted that one day, through countless such acts, the entire earth will become an image of heaven, a spiritualized planet, glowing with the harmony of the kingdom fulfilled. Every prayer, every conscious deed contributes to this great transformation. Thus to whisper, "Thy kingdom come," is to pledge one's hands and heart to the work of cosmic renewal. It is not a passive hope, but an active vow, to be a living stone in the building of God's house upon earth. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. If thy kingdom come is the building of the inner temple, then thy will be done is the lighting of its flame. For Rudolf Steiner, this line represents the most profound turning point in the Lord's Prayer, the moment when the human will, long enslaved by desire and fear, begins to align with the divine intention that breathes through all worlds. It is here that the bridge between heaven and earth is built, not by angels, but by human consciousness learning to will in harmony with spirit. We often speak of God's will as if it were something external, an invisible decree written somewhere beyond the clouds. But Steiner revealed a subtler mystery. Divine will is not imposed from outside. It whispers from within. It is the living current that moves through the depths of our being, though we rarely recognize it amid the noise of our personal wants. When we pray, "Thy will be done," We are not surrendering our freedom, we are awakening to its true source. Imagine the human soul as a mountain peak between two currents of lightning. One current descends from the heavens, the pure impulse of divine intention. The other rises from the depths, the restless surge of human desire. Between them stands the eye, trembling, unsure which fire to receive. When the soul is unawakened, it chases the flicker of its own passions, mistaking them for freedom. But when the eye begins to attune to higher guidance, it learns to let the heavenly current pass through it into the world. Then the lightning no longer burns, it illuminates. This is what Steiner meant by the transformation of will. To live according to divine will does not mean to suppress our individuality. It means to discover that true individuality begins only when we serve something greater than ourselves. Personal will is like a candle. Divine will is the sunrise. The task of spiritual development is not to extinguish the candle, but to let its small flame unite with the dawn. Reflect on how often we live divided. One part of us knows what is right, another part resists it. We call this inner conflict, but Steiner saw it as the field where higher evolution takes place. Each time we choose conscience over convenience, love over fear, patience over impulse, we are weaving a strand of light into the bridge between heaven and earth. Slowly, the two worlds draw closer. Thy will be done is thus not a resignation. It is a creative act, an invocation of harmony where duality once ruled. In modern life, the word will has grown thin. We associate it with ambition, with pushing or achieving. But divine will, Steiner said, is quiet, rhythmic, unyielding as the tide. It does not force. It permeates. It is the intelligence of becoming, the same will that guides a seed toward light, that draws the stars along their courses. To align with it is to enter that same current, to act not from haste, but from luminous necessity. Perhaps you have felt moments when something greater seemed to move through you, when words, deeds, or intuitions arose with a clarity that felt not yours alone. Those are glimpses of divine will made manifest in earthly form. They come not through strain, but through stillness, when the heart is emptied of noise. Steiner urged his students to cultivate moral imagination, to picture the good, not abstractly, but as a living force entering their actions. In doing so, one becomes a vessel through which divine will can flow. Ask yourself, how would your life change if every decision, every movement, every breath were an echo of a higher rhythm? What if instead of asking, "What do I want?" you asked, "What wants to unfold through me?" This is not submission, but participation, the transformation of will from egoic assertion into creative cooperation. Thy will be done invites us to live as co-authors of destiny, guided not by fear or habit, but by the quiet authority of truth. And what of the phrase, "on earth as it is in heaven"? Here Steiner heard not a metaphor, but the central purpose of evolution, that the spiritual harmony of the higher worlds should one day be mirrored in the material realm. Heaven and earth are not opposites. They are the two poles of one reality. Humanity stands between them as mediator. When the human will resonates with divine will, heaven descends into matter. The earthly is redeemed by consciousness. This alignment is the secret of energy protection in the deepest sense. When one acts from divine will, one stands within a current too pure for discordant forces to enter. Fear cannot touch what is rooted in purpose. Steiner taught that to know the divine will in the smallest task, washing a cup, speaking a word, offering a kindness, is to sanctify the world. Each act becomes a signature of heaven inscribed upon earth. As an exercise before any important action, perhaps before speaking, creating, or deciding, pause and inwardly say, Thy will be done. Feel the tension between your expectation and the unknown. Then release it. Let something larger move through you. You will feel a shift, a warmth, a subtle alignment, as if invisible hands were gently turning you toward the right direction. That is the touch of the divine will in motion. The soul who lives in this way becomes a bridge. Through it, heaven begins to shape earth. The inner temple, built through devotion, now becomes luminous, for the fire of divine purpose burns within its walls. The prayer teaches us that spiritual life is not escape, but embodiment, the descent of the eternal into the present moment. And in that descent, the world itself begins to change, for wherever divine will is done, heaven is already here. When Steiner spoke about the Lord's Prayer, he often paused at its final words. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. To him, this was not merely a conclusion, but a return to the beginning. The kingdom represents the world as it should be, imbued with divine order. Power signifies the living will that courses through all creation, and glory is the radiant consciousness that arises when human souls begin to mirror the divine. Together, these words form a bridge between heaven and earth, between our limited self and the cosmic being that breathes through all. Steiner taught that when a person truly speaks these final words, they do not end the prayer, they awaken from it. It is as if the prayer itself had been a descent, a journey inward through layers of thought and feeling, through fears and desires, through the dense forest of the human condition. And at the end, one emerges into a clearing where light floods the soul, not a blinding light, but one that reveals meaning in every leaf, every sound, every gesture of life. To realize that thine is the kingdom is to see that no separation truly exists, that the divine is not out there, but in every breath we take, in every person we meet, in every act of understanding. Yet such awareness demands responsibility. It asks us to live consciously, to align thought, feeling, and will with the sacred rhythm of the cosmos. Steiner often warned that intellectual knowledge alone cannot save humanity. Only inner transformation, through meditation, prayer, and self-observation, can make the soul a vessel for higher truth. He urged his listeners not to repeat the Lord's Prayer mechanically, but to live it, to embody forgiveness, to seek the spiritual bread of insight, to confront temptation with courage, and to acknowledge the divine source of all being. Imagine, then, a world where millions truly pray in this way, not pleading, not fearing, but awakening. Each soul, a small sun radiating awareness, joining with others until humanity becomes a constellation of light. This, Steiner suggested, is the destiny of the earth itself, to become a planet of love, a reflection of the divine will made manifest. And so, as you finish this reflection, pause before your next breath. Let the words resonate quietly within. Our Father. Allow them to expand beyond doctrine, beyond memory. Let them become an experience. For in that sacred silence, the prayer is no longer something you say, it is something you are. Carry this understanding into your daily life. Begin the morning with one conscious breath, as if inhaling the divine presence within you. Let each act, however small, be done with awareness, as an offering. Forgive where it seems impossible. Share light where darkness prevails. Then the words of the prayer will cease to be ancient syllables. They will become living forces reshaping your inner world. If this journey has stirred something within you, consider it a sign. The soul's quiet remembrance of its divine origin. Continue walking this path. Meditate, observe, question, and awaken. And if you feel called, join others in this exploration. Share your reflections, your moments of insight, your doubts and discoveries. We are all learning to pray not merely with lips, but with the whole being. For the true power of the Lord's Prayer, as Steiner revealed, lies not in asking, but in becoming. To speak these words is to participate in the act of creation itself, to align one's will with the eternal. And when that happens, even the simplest whisper, "Our Father," echoes through the universe. So, let us continue together on this shared path of awakening. May your days grow more luminous, your heart more steady, and your soul ever nearer to the source of all light. There is a moment, Steiner said, when prayer ceases to be an act of devotion and becomes an act of remembrance, when the soul no longer feels separate from its origin. This moment is the hidden heart of the Lord's Prayer. It arrives quietly, without thunder or vision. One may simply be sitting, repeating the sacred words, when suddenly an inner warmth unfolds, a recognition that what we have been addressing as our Father is not distant at all. It is the essence of our own being. Steiner described this as the moment when the I am of the human merges in conscious harmony with the I am of the divine. The prayer becomes a mirror in which the soul perceives itself as part of the eternal creative word, the Logos that brought the world into being. This realization is not born of emotion, but of deep, living stillness. In that silence, one begins to perceive the divine as a rhythm rather than a doctrine, a pulse that moves through breath, through nature, through the cycles of life and death. When this awareness dawns, every line of the Lord's Prayer transforms into a living force. Hallowed be thy name becomes a vow to speak truthfully, to let words carry the vibration of purity. Thy kingdom come becomes an inner commitment to manifest harmony and justice within oneself and in one's surroundings. Thy will be done no longer feels oppressive. It becomes liberation, the joy of acting in accordance with the great cosmic design. This is what Steiner meant by spiritual science, a discipline of consciousness, where the laws of spirit are studied and experienced as precisely as those of nature. Through such practice, the Lord's Prayer is no longer an ancient formula. It becomes a living experiment in transformation. Every day, one can observe how thoughts become clearer when aligned with divine order, how emotions settle when touched by reverence, how the will strengthens when united with love. The challenge is not to believe, but to see. Can you sense how the same creative power that formed the stars also moves in your heartbeat? Can you feel that the act of forgiving another is not a moral duty, but an alchemical process, transmuting pain into light? These are not poetic images, but spiritual facts. Steiner insisted on this. To live the prayer is to awaken within these realities. In our age, where noise and haste cloud perception, this practice is a quiet revolution. To pray consciously is to resist the hypnosis of materialism. It is to remember that every human being carries a spark of the divine within, and that this spark, when nurtured, can illumine the darkness of the world. That is why Steiner called the Lord's Prayer the archetype of all prayers, not because it is superior, but because it encapsulates the whole journey of the soul, from separation to union, from ignorance to wisdom, from fear to love. And perhaps that is the secret Steiner wanted us to rediscover. Not to worship the prayer, but to let the prayer awaken us. The words are like seeds. If planted in the soil of silence and tended with attention, they blossom into spiritual perception. The day will come when you no longer need to speak them aloud, for their essence will live in every gesture, every look, every thought. So, as you close this contemplation, do not rush. Let the final words rest gently in your heart, for thine is the kingdom, and the power and the glory. Breathe them, feel them, become them, then rise and carry their light into the world. For every act of awareness, every breath of gratitude, every quiet kindness extends the kingdom a little further on earth. And this, Steiner would say, is how the prayer continues, not in churches or temples, but in awakened human beings who have learned to speak with the language of the soul. There is a sacred paradox hidden within the Lord's Prayer, one that Steiner illuminated with both tenderness and precision. It is this. Although we speak the prayer to the divine simultaneously speaks it through us. Each phrase is a breath shared between heaven and earth, a vibration that rises and descends in a rhythmic dialogue. In this dialogue, human consciousness is not a passive listener, but a participant in the ongoing creation of the cosmos. To understand this, Steiner urged his listeners to consider that sound itself is a bridge between worlds. Every word carries a form, a resonance that shapes the etheric substance of existence. When we utter "Our Father," we are not sending a petition upward. We are awakening the divine name within the fabric of the world. The very act of speaking aligns us with the forces that sustain life. It is no accident that in Genesis creation begins with a word, nor that the Gospel of John proclaims, "In the beginning was the Word." Thus, the Lord's Prayer is not a request, it is a participation in that primordial word. Steiner often described prayer as a form of creative breathing. When we speak, we exhale spirit into form. When we listen inwardly, we inhale divine will into the soul. To pray consciously, then, is to synchronize one's inner rhythm with that of the cosmos. One could say it is a dialogue between the finite and the infinite, spoken not in language but in vibration. Consider this. When you pray, "Give us this day our daily bread," the true bread is not merely nourishment for the body, but the sustenance of spiritual understanding. Each day, life offers us experiences, some joyful, others painful, that, when digested with awareness, become food for the soul. Have you ever felt how a single moment of gratitude can nourish your whole being more deeply than a meal? Steiner would say that in such moments you are partaking of the bread of heaven. And when we say, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us," we are not merely balancing moral accounts. We are dissolving barriers that keep the soul imprisoned in the weight of the past. Forgiveness, in this sense, is a cosmic act. It restores flow where stagnation once ruled. It allows the spiritual forces of renewal to enter our lives. Every act of forgiveness is an act of creation, a restoration of divine movement in the fabric of human relationship. Through this lens, each phrase of the Lord's Prayer becomes a spiritual exercise, a gesture of alignment with the divine order. "Thy will be done" invites us to surrender the narrow logic of the ego to the vast wisdom of the Spirit. "Lead us not into temptation" asks us to awaken our inner watchfulness, to recognize the subtle forces that pull us away from truth. "Deliver us from evil" is not a plea for rescue, but a declaration of power, the acknowledgement that the light within us is stronger than any shadow. The entire prayer, then, is a movement from unity, Our Father, through the trials of human life, temptation, forgiveness, daily bread, and back again into unity, Thine is the kingdom. It mirrors the descent of the soul into matter and its gradual reascent towards spirit. Steiner would say that to pray this consciously is to rehearse the entire cosmic journey of humanity within a few sacred lines. And perhaps this is the greatest secret of all, that when the Lord's Prayer is spoken with awareness, the universe listens. The angels who accompany human evolution, those luminous beings Steiner often described, hear the resonance of these words as living music, a signal that another soul has remembered its origin. Each time we pray thus, the heavens are strengthened and the world brightens, however subtly. So do not underestimate the power of a single prayer. Spoken from the heart, it reshapes both the inner and outer worlds. It restores harmony where confusion reigns. It builds invisible bridges between souls. And above all, it reminds us that we are not alone in our striving. Every true prayer is a thread in the great tapestry of awakening, woven by countless beings seen and unseen.